You're listening to Nature as Beloved, Nature as Self, a podcast about wilderness Christian mysticism. I'm your host, Stephen Hatch, a contemplative living in New Mexico and former faculty at Naropa University. For over 45 years, I've been leading a simple lifestyle, combining family life with meditation, silence, and solitary time in the great outdoors. Along the way, I've developed an outlook rooted in Christian spirituality, informed by the world's great mystical traditions, and inspired by the wisdom found in nature. I'll be joined by my co-host, Will Warwick, also a contemplative, nature lover, and religious studies scholar. This podcast is for kindred mystics, lovers of nature, and people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious. It's for those who are genuine seekers of truth, goodness, and beauty. And it's for those who want to live a more authentic life. Please join us as we explore the vast landscape of this contemplative tradition. Today I'd like to give an introduction to the topic of the sacred masculine. It's a really important topic for our time because we hear so much about the toxic masculine and the idea that men are too distant, too oppressive, interested in dominating rather than empowering, too objectifying. So we have a sense that the masculine, that there's something basically wrong about it in our society. And we see this reflected really in a crisis of young boys who don't do well in school. Many don't go to college. And there's just a general sense of angst among men and among boys. I remember when I taught in the university setting, it seemed like men would walk around campus with their heads hung as though they were the source of all the world's problems. And so it serves really no one, neither men nor women, for men to feel that they're identified only with the toxic masculine. We see many men who appear to have no drive or who are passionless, who don't know how to initiate in the dating world, or who simply embrace the old standards of toxic masculinity and are domineering and too oppressive and objectifying and all of that. So we're desperately in need of a sense of the sacred masculine. Women have been able to work for decades on a sense of the goddess or the sacred feminine, and we see so much written about that. But when it comes to men, there's very little written about the sacred masculine. The archetype of the father God is seen as oppressive and punishing, and masculinity in general is viewed as suspect. After all, we see many world leaders right now manifesting the worst of the toxic masculine, dominating, egocentric, trying to exert their power over everything and over the entire world. So we're desperately in need of a sacred masculine, and I've devoted quite a bit of my life to this topic. I first became interested in the sacred masculine when I went to seminary in it would have been the early 90s, and I went into a class and I was shocked. There were all of these women seminary students who were angry at men, which didn't make a lot of sense to me in the context because the men I knew in seminary were giving, they wanted to help others, but basically many of the feminist women in the class, which I would have called second wave feminism, which was the type that was especially strident at the time, were angry at men and saw us as the source of all the world's problems. So the psychologist on campus started a support group for men to try to talk about our issues. And about the same time, really starting in the late 80s and going into the early 90s, the mythopoetic men's movement came to the fore. Poet Robert Bly, with his book Iron John, and then Sam Keen and others, were trying to help men get in touch with their core masculinity, with their own vulnerability, and with their sense of being out of touch with their true spiritual power. So I got really involved with that movement. Later, Richard Rohr in the Christian tradition started talking about the sacred masculine, especially in the context of the wild man, the one who's fully alive to his innate sacred wildness, made in the image of a wild creator. So this topic is something that, again, is very important. It seems that after the mythopoetic men's movement of the late 80s and early 90s, men went into hiding. The media kind of shamed the movement, made it look like a bunch of silly men running off into the woods to drum and talk about their feelings. So men have basically gone into hiding. There's a lot of passionlessness. There is not much ability to really initiate in relationships, and women are quite frustrated about men. Of course, then we have, since the Me Too movement, awareness of many of the men who have seen women as something to be manipulated, and the whole awareness of rape and all of the horrible aspects of toxic masculinity that go with that. But a byproduct of that movement is that many men have felt, well, they're not going to initiate at all, because any kind of initiation in a heterosexual relationship could be viewed as oppressive. It seems that assertiveness has been conflated with aggressiveness. So many men don't initiate at all, and they wait for the woman to initiate so they can be sure that the relationship or the interaction is indeed wanted. So both men and women need a sense of the sacred masculine. What is it? And so that's what I'd like to talk a bit about today. We'll return to this topic later times, because there's so much to be said about it. But I think one of the things that people critique the most is a sense of a father God. Is always viewed, that we talk about patriarchy as this really oppressive kind of domineering energy that comes from men. But my experience, having been a father myself, is that fatherhood has nothing to do with being punishing and oppressive and distant and discouraging creativity. My experience of fatherhood is the exact opposite. It is a trust in one's children and a realization that they will find their way. If you think of a young child that goes out to play and maybe gets a cut or a scrape, and they come in crying, if the mother's the one that is on duty, she'll, put a Band-Aid on and give wonderful, soothing words, and then maybe hold the child and rock them and embrace them and hold them. On the other hand, if a man is the one in charge, the dad, let's say, he'll put the Band-Aid on, and he'll, probably eventually go, pat, you're fine, and send them back out to play. The idea being that there's several different forms of nurturing. There's the more cuddling, the more embracing form of the feminine sort of nurturing, and then there is the more trusting, I send you out into the world kind of nurturing that comes from the dad. So it's just two different forms of nurturing. I remember another time one of my daughters was applying for her driver's license, and so we went to the driver's license bureau, and I said, well, you've got this. You can go up to the counter and get things started, and I'll just sit right back here, maybe 20 feet behind in the waiting area. And if you need me, come get me, but you got this. I trust you. And I remember my daughter saying, well, Mom would never do that. Mom would come with me up to the counter. And I thought, well, that's wonderful. But a man's form, a dad's form of nurturing is to be present, to be there, but to trust the child and allow them to see that they are trustworthy and that they can develop their own confidence. So really, fathering is a sense of, I'm here, I'm going to teach you the principles that I believe are worthwhile in life, but then you're going to go out into the world and you're going to make your own way, and you'll take the tools that I have helped instill in you, and you will make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but I want you to be daring, to take a moderate amount of risk, and you'll learn from your mistakes. But you don't have to worry about it. Just pick yourself up and keep moving. So a dad's form of nurturing is very much that sort of trusting. And so this whole emphasis on fatherhood is a God that's ready to squash you if you don't believe the right things. I simply don't relate to that at all. So one of the aspects of sacred masculinity, of course, is transcendence. That's the sense of the great beyond, the sense that God is, as it were, coming from another realm. If we look at it in terms of Hindu philosophy, you've got the Shakti energy, which is to say that all of life around us is the sacred feminine, and then the masculine is Shiva, and he's off meditating, and then of course Shakti lures him into the world to embody his own energy, his own meditative energy, and one of the images that's used is he is the spacious lake on which Shakti energy, the lotus flower, floats. So transcendence is not just beyond us for the sake of beyondness. In other words, you'll never understand any of the mysteries, let's say in the Christian teachings, because they're beyond the mind, and you'll never know why they are what they are, say the teaching on the Trinity or whatever. You just have to accept them. Well, that's not at all what transcendence is. Transcendence is more that sense of the beyond. Spaciousness is a good Buddhist kind of term to refer to it. It's a spaciousness that is as though a kind of backdrop, like the sky. Navajo talk about Father Sky, upon which all of the drama of life can occur. That's where everything arises in that space, and it is given birth, and it burgeons, and it flowers. And so it is a transcendence that isn't distant or absent, which is another critique of the toxic masculine, right, is absent, the absent father. Rather, it's right there, but it's a transparent kind of spaciousness. God's transcendence or spaciousness is so large you might not even know it's there because it's so huge. But it's a sort of transparent space of love that allows all things to be given birth and to burgeon and to grow. You might think of Joseph in the Christmas story. He's given very little attention. All the attention goes on to Mary and the baby Jesus, but he's there as that sort of backdrop, protecting, hovering in the background, making sure that everyone is safe. So there's this sense of the backdrop, the transcendence, the spaciousness that is what God is, and it also involves a sense of solitude. And the dimension within both men and women to seek out solitude would be that transcendence, would be that identification with the solitude of God, which is to say that it goes beyond the swirl of everyday emotions and phenomena in order to find a source of meaning that is deeper and vaster, on which all of the swirl of life can then feel free to occur. So again, it's a relational kind of solitude. We go off into solitude in order to come back with a more enhanced perspective that can serve the whole, that can serve those around us. We might also think of transcendence, since the vision, gaze, is kind of a masculine form of perception, we might say. It involves distance. If you put a book right up to your nose, you can't read it because it's too close. So you have to push the book away. You have to put your own being a little bit apart from the book so that you can see. So you might say metaphorically, that's what the sacred masculine, what God does, is to step back in order to see the whole. So it's a stepping back in order to be fully engaged then. Just as when you're reading, you step back a bit from the page in order to be able to see what's going on in the text. So it's an engaged transcendence, an engaged spaciousness or backdrop. Now, along with this transcendence goes this sense of the gaze, the penetrative gaze. Unfortunately, in our time, the word penetrate is often seen as toxic alone. It's not seen as something honorable or noble at all. It's viewed as something that's going to be oppressive and invasive. But that's not at all what it is. We talk about insight, that ability to see into. And it is gentle, and it is a gaze that melts and softens. So there is that sort of divine gaze. We talk about the vision of God. Well, that is God's vision of us. And that is the ability to see through the surface phenomena, the surface swirl of energy, to look deeply within in order to see the sacred that is present there. And that's precisely what the gaze of God is. It is this sort of light that sees through all things and is able to look and find the sacred deep within. And as a man, that is what I see my own gaze as. Its ability to penetrate, to permeate through the surface of things in order to find the deepest aspect of a person. And when we're talking about other people, it's a gentle kind of gaze that really sees a person and looks through all of the external turmoil they might be going through to find what's the truest thing in their core, that is their noble divine core. So it is a very gentle kind of warming, melting kind of gaze, as we talk about when someone is melted by a gaze of love that's able to see through, and it's characterized by a sort of point A to point B kind of energy, which is what the masculine is identified with. We have a vision, and we see through the superficial, we see through the surface to that which is deeper. We might say that a more sacred feminine type of perception is meandering. It is like a meandering river that takes into account all the different territory of the different river bends. It seeks to bring them all together and to see first one position and then another position and then to integrate them. The sacred masculine is more like a waterfall or a roaring stream. It has a certain goal in mind, but that goal can't be oppressive. It has to be something that is there to empower others, to see through the surface of what a person's struggles are, to be able to see, well, how is the divine already working in a person's life? A person might come to us in spiritual direction and say, I don't think I have anything of value. And so we help them return to where was the last place in their lives that the Spirit spoke to them. So it's very much a sense of seeing through the clutter and the distress on the surface to look at what is deepest within. So the penetrative gaze is something that is very liberating. And if it's ever felt to be oppressive, well, we're really not having an experience then of the true gaze. You think of Jesus, who was able to see through those around him and see to their deepest core. Another aspect of the sacred masculine is a sense of a playful kind of fight. One of the reasons that men don't seem to be very attracted to much spirituality these days, or even much contemplative spirituality, is it seems to emphasize receptivity and accepting what is true in life and receiving insight, which is, of course, a very important part of the spiritual journey. Every day I'm listening and seeking to receive the impressions of the Spirit, which I then write in my journal and seek to live by. It's a sense of being engulfed by the divine mystery. We might say that's the sacred feminine, that sense of being gripped and held and engulfed. But corresponding to that is the sacred masculine, which is a playful kind of fight, a playful kind of resistance, And that's something that men often don't find in spirituality. And then in the absence of finding it, they move to the fundamentalisms, which fight by trying to proselytize the world, which try to dominate the world. They move to the fight of the toxic masculine. But the sacred masculine has a kind of playful sort of fight. Here we can think of the story of Jacob in the Hebrew, who is the forefather of the Hebrews. He wants a blessing from Yahweh, from the divine source. And so an angel comes in the middle of the night to Jacob. That's God in the form of this angel. And Jacob says, I want a blessing. And the angel says, you're not going to get it. So what happens? Jacob wrestles with the angel. And the angel keeps saying, you're not going to get this blessing. You might as well give up. And Jacob says, no, I really want this blessing. So it says then he's wounded in the thigh by the angel, and the angel relents and gives in and gives him the blessing. So Jacob was able to see the angel's true intention, the divine source, God's true intention, which is he did want to give the blessing, but wanted to see Jacob's feisty, fiery energy come out. And of course, Jacob is then renamed Yisrael, which means he struggles with God. So we have a whole nation, Israel, which is then named after this incident. You think of that chutzpah, or that feistiness of the Jewish people that comes from this story of Jacob. So Jacob fathoms the true intention of God, which is to give the blessing, but then sees through the seeming resistance that the angel gives, and then wrestles. Now, I want to make it clear that this kind of spiritual wrestling, for what we know the Spirit has revealed to us, we are meant to find and to have, always occurs within the context of union. And we might call that the sacred feminine, that sense of being engulfed, being held, being within the divine presence. So it's more like this playful fight comes from within the union. It's not something that leads to it, or it's not something outside of or separate from it, but it is a kind of energy that's within it. I like to use the metaphor of the mirror image that is, of course, completely dependent on the one standing in front of the mirror. We might say the one standing in front of the mirror is God, and we might say that we are the mirror image, right? So the divine holds up the mirror and sees us in the mirror, right? We're a totally receptive, passive reflection. But lo and behold, the mirror image starts to flirt with the one standing in front of the image, starts to say words that the one standing in front of the mirror never said, starts to speak in a voice that the one standing in front of the mirror never spoke. And so there is a sense that the mirror image returns with fresh gestures in a way that shocks the one standing in front of the mirror with delight. And that's what each of us is. We're meant to be creators, but co-creators within the experience of union, so that it's like the mirror image returning with fresh gestures and in a new voice. We might also think of this in terms of the metaphor of the echo. It's as though the creator silently speaks out a word, and it echoes off of the spacious expanse of our own being, and it comes back to the creator with words that he never spoke and in a voice that is different than his. Again, I'm talking metaphorically here. So then the creator is absolutely shocked with surprise that the echo returns with new words and in a fresh voice. That's what our creativity is. It is this sense that we're returning with something fresh and new. So that, in a sense, is what Jacob is giving to the divine presence. You might say that he's contributing his own fiery feistiness to the divine. He's a mirror in which the divine can be seen. He's made in the image and likeness of God. He's a mirror of God, but he is contributing something new. So the divine creator, God, has to resist in order to get that to come out, right? In order to get that fresh creativity to burgeon forth. So the reason for the resistance in the story, the angel resisting Jacob, is in order for Jacob's fiery chutzpah or feistiness to come out, so that within the divine union, God can be pleasingly surprised and shocked. John Ruysbroek in the 14th century spoke about this kind of play in terms of God's generous love and God's craving love. So you might say God's craving love is the feminine aspect that wants to suck us into union and engulf us to almost to the point where we disappear into this union because we are desired so intensely by God. So that is the craving love, and Ruysbroek says that God gives us a generous love that is pushing us back out into our identities, with our gifts of resistance, with our gifts of creativity, our gifts of being able to make meaning out of seeming absence. And he says that the craving love wants the generous love, that is, that wants us to fight back against that sense of being engulfed and resist it. And so to maintain ourselves as a mirror in which the divine can see itself. Because if we're simply sucked into union, then the divine can't see itself. We talked about that vision, having to push something away. Well, we have to be pushed away, in a sense, for God to be able to see himself, right? So the generous love pushes us back into our identity so that we can work creatively in the world, so that we can find meaning in what seems like meaninglessness. And all of this results in a sense of God finding great delight that the mirror image is returning with fresh gestures and the echo is returning with new words. We might also think of this absence that comes when we're given generous love, that is pushed into our own being, where we seem separate from the divine. The medieval monks in the Cistercian system talked about the verse in the Song of Songs, which is a allegory of love play between a male and female lover, where God is seen as the male in that, and the soul is seen as the female. There is this sense that the male lover says to the female, "Oh, turn away, beloved. Turn your eyes away. They overwhelm me." So you get this sense that perhaps the female lover is dancing. And the male lover turns away and says, "Oh, you're too much. I can't take it." And of course, what does that really mean? It doesn't mean I want you to stay away. It doesn't mean I don't think you're attractive. It means what? It means show me more. So the sense of turning away, holding one's hands up and saying, "Oh, you're too much," means I want to see more. So in a sense, that's what the Creator, what God does with us. Turning away in order to get us to show more of our inner beauty, more of our inner feistiness. And we can interpret that in terms of the female part of us, the feminine part of us, showing the beauty, or we can talk about the masculine part of us that wants to resist and to make meaning out of seeming absence. So there is this playfulness, there is this sense of distance, that leads to this kind of playful fight that shows new things to the divine beloved, to God. We might think of Hadovich of Antwerp, who was one of the medieval mystics of Egin in the 13th century. She talked about noble unfaith being more honorable than faith. Faith is just accepting, well, whatever happens, I trust that to be the divine will. Noble unfaith, she said, happens within divine union, where we say, well, no, all the love seems to be on my side. What's wrong with you, God? All the love is on my side. And of course, then God loves that, because that means that there's a part of the divine image that's returning with its own gestures, a part of the echo returning with its own words. So there is a kind of beauty in this sort of play that can be very attractive to males who want to put, their feisty energy into the spiritual journey and not just see it as a letting go and an accepting of what is. Together with this goes the trickster aspect of the divine, which is really implicit in what I've been saying. There's this trickster that really wants to bring out the best in us by seeming to resist. We might say that our very lives in this world are founded on a kind of trickster principle. We think of quantum physics, where things seem to be solid, but in actuality, they're mostly like 99% empty space, right? So they appear to be solid, but they're actually empty space. So there's a sort of trickster element built into the very crux of reality. We think of Jesus with the trickster spirit, right? After his death and then the resurrection, there's two disciples walking along the road to Emmaus, commiserating about Jesus' death, and a stranger comes along, and then it says that as he comes, he's talking with them and asking why they're sad, and he's consoling them, and then the darkness comes on. They say, well, we have to find an inn. Why don't you stay with us? So he comes into the inn with them, and they have a meal, and he breaks bread, and they suddenly see, oh, this is the risen Christ. So what happens? Poof, he immediately is gone. And then they say, did not our heart, singular, unite together as he spoke to us and opened to us the scriptures to show that, that the Christ would suffer and that sort of thing. So there's that trickster aspect of Jesus. There's also the trickster aspect of Mary Magdalene coming to the empty tomb, and there she meets the gardener, right? And then she says, well, do you know where he's been laid? I can't see him in the tomb. And so what happens? The gardener turns to Mary and says simply, Mary. And she realizes that it's Jesus. So there's Jesus appearing in the form of a gardener. That's the trickster aspect. Again, we might think of Rumi, the Sufi mystic from Konya, Turkey, who speaks of the trickster God in this way. What images does he play at? What tricks contrive? If he's present in form, he'll flee by way of spirit. Seek him in the sky, and he shines from the water like the moon. Enter the water, and he flees up to heaven. Call him from the placeless, and he points you to place. Seek him in place, and he flees to the placeless. When it sees an attempt at speaking, his name flees, so that you cannot say, so-and-so will flee. He will flee from you so that if you try to draw images, the image will fly from the tablet. The expression will flee from the heart. So we can see in all of this that there is a sense that God's insight occurs to us, and then it seems to disappear, right? And it disappears because the divine self-empties into us, and we no longer see the insight. Or we might say that the insight is absorbed up into the divine presence, so then it is not available for our perception. So there is a kind of flash that occurs. I've spoken of the divine spark before. Eckhart talks about the Funklein, the little spark. Jesus talks about the mustard seed. Rilke talks about the sense that the crystal cup that rings as it shatters. There's a sense that the divine insight shatters and disappears within us, or is taken up into the divine presence. So there is this trickster energy of the flash of the divine presence and then seeming to disappear. It's a very beautiful kind of image that occurs when we see this in a trickster kind of a way. We might also think of the shape-shifting that occurs with the native Alaskan stories, where we have Raven, he shape-shifts into an hemlock needle, or he shape-shifts into a person in order to steal the sun and the moon and the stars away from a old grandfather, and release it into the sky so there can be light. There is this shape-shifting that constantly occurs in Native American stories that is really quite beautiful. So there is this trickster aspect in the Godhead itself. Indeed, the raven is the trickster for many of the Pacific Northwest tribes. So the trickster aspect is really a major aspect of the sacred masculine. I want to talk then about this aspect of male sexuality that so much is seen only in its toxic version. I think male sexuality is critiqued first because males are seen as focused so much on physical beauty in women, and women want to be seen for more than just their physical beauty, and the sense that males are often attracted to a diversity of different partners, and then when they act on that through affairs or whatever, they hurt their committed partner, and you have a mess. In our monogamous society, we're meant to stay committed to one person and then allow the energy to be transmitted, to be transformed into a spiritual energy in other ways, so that we don't constantly seek after a multiplicity of partners and keep hurting our own lives and our own relationship. So it's interesting, in the mystical traditions, really, the divine masculine is seen as singular. You think of the monotheistic religions that are constantly speaking of God as one and as singular. And the feminine, by contrast, is a multiplicity. You think of the feminist theologians that talk about how the sacred feminine is really a web of beings. You think of the Laguna Pueblo tradition here in New Mexico, where the creator is a spider woman. She's a spider thought woman who creates, along with her sisters, memory and intuition. And together they create a web in the world of creatures. So they're all rooted in and participate in this multiplicity of sacred feminine presences. Well, you might think also of the Navajo tradition, changing woman, who is a kind of a goddess, creator figure, but who shapeshifts into 4 different goddesses. So she starts as white shell woman, which represents the east and dawn and infancy, and from there she shapeshifts into turquoise woman, which is the south and growth, and which is adolescence, and from there she shapeshifts into yellow corn woman, who represents harvest and adulthood, and then finally she shapeshifts into abalone shell woman, which is the north, which represents spiritual growth and wisdom and elderhood. It's the same presence, but she has all different forms. So we might say that the goddess is innately multiple. So if the God energy is going to be attracted to goddess energy, what will it be attracted to? Multiplicity. But the thing is, this is meant to be interpreted in a metaphorical sense, in a spiritual sense, and not in a literalistic sense, so that a man, when he's attracted to the goddess, doesn't have to keep seeking more and more women to have a relationship with, or a sexual relationship with, but instead he's able to see the multiplicity of the earth. I myself have an attraction to a multitude of different landscapes of the West. In a sense, I feel myself at home in the entire West. And oftentimes, I remember earlier in our relationship, when I was trying to develop my own theology, I would get grumpy when I felt like I was going nowhere. And my wife would say, well, you need to go visit your other woman now, by which she meant you need to go off into solitude, you need to go off into nature, into one of the landscapes that you love, the desert Southwest, the Rocky Mountains, and then get in touch with the wisdom that's present there. I find myself, even though I live in the desert Southwest, in the high desert of Taos, I find it's as though the goddess of the Pacific Northwest woos me to see those massive snowy volcanic peaks and old-growth forests at some times of the year. At other times, the Colorado Rockies are wooing me, and at other times, southern New Mexico landscape is wooing me. So it's a multitude of different feminine presences that is constantly wooing me. So the sacred masculine is able to take the desire for multiplicity and to find it in a multiplicity of landscape features, different cultures, different religious traditions, different aspects of wisdom that are the sacred feminine, rather than hurting his partner or making a mess of things by constantly seeking out other women. so that he can develop friendships with the other women in his life and not try to pursue them romantically, and instead shift his primary focus to the goddess, and so be able to be a good partner in his primary relationship, but then have that fertilized by this relationship to the goddess. And so it's a beauty that's found all throughout nature. So a woman doesn't have to feel she's being valued just for her own physical beauty, but a man can fall in love with mountains and wildflower meadows and skies and ocean vistas and the beauty of the landscape. So there's a transmutation of male sexuality in that way. The other aspect of this is the realization that the sacred feminine, the goddess, Sophia, is already present in the energy of desire. So, for example, if we desire a person to have a romantic relationship with, rather than focusing on the person, we can focus on the fact that all the while we are gripped and grasped by that desire, which is the sacred feminine within us. We talked about the phallic, the lingam aspect of the penetrative gaze that sees through to the core of things as the sacred masculine, but the sacred feminine has this kind of yoni energy, which is a gripping and a grasping of us through the desire that we feel in life for goodness and beauty. And so realize that we already have the sacred feminine within our desire. The Christian mystical tradition teaches us that we have what we seek already because we are participants in the desire of the divine for us. Our desire doesn't stand alone. It's already a participation in a being desired. So in this case, we are desired by the sacred feminine, so we have what we want already within us. So we take our energy, our focus off the one that we desire in the moment, and instead focus on the sense that we already have the sacred feminine in the energy of being desired. So I hope that this brief overview of the sacred masculine stimulates thoughts in you and new questions, and we will pursue these in more depth in a later podcast episode. So I hope that you have a wonderful month, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Dear friends and listeners, we've come to the end of this episode of Nature as Beloved, Nature as Self. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know by liking, commenting, and sharing this episode with others. If you have a question you would like answered, are interested in learning more about a topic, or would like to pursue one-on-one spiritual direction with either of us, you can write to us at natureasbeloved@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram at natureasbeloved. For daily photos and quotes, you can follow Stephen on Facebook or Instagram at the Stephen Hatch Outlook. And for more information about Stephen's books, you can find them on Stephen K. Hatch's Amazon author page. Until next time, may you continue to walk in beauty, be well, and stay wild.